98.1.
I'm gonna sit down partway through. I'm just letting you know. Studio silence.
Investor.
And a good morning to you once more, Lagos. You're tuned in and listening to Smooth Breakfast on Smooth 98.1. Merry Christmas, everybody. Right now it's 7:31, which means it is time to delve into the world of detailed newspaper analysis inside of Freshly Pressed. Joining me in the studio this morning to do just that, I've got Ikemesit Effiong, aka Judge Ike. Merry Christmas to you, Ikemesit. Thanks for coming
Christmas. Merry Christmas,
I appreciate it. We're clearly in the energy because we're up. We're doing things. We're doing things. And we've got Fred Allison in the studio as well. Good morning, Fred. How are you?
Good morning, Lagos. Good morning.
Excellent. Great to have you here as well. You can find him up on social media as at Mr. FB Allison. Very distinguished fellow. Very distinguished.
And the native and the cap
is distinguished. It's a South distinguishing.
Okay.
Anyways, as we sidestep that, Lagos do join us in conversation this morning. We know that it's a rather relaxed one for all of you, and we appreciate it. So feel free to casually just join us in our conversation. Tweet at Smooth981FM. Just make sure you use the hashtag FreshlyPressed981, and you can also send in messages to us on our WhatsApp number. It is 0809 444 0981. All right. So let's get into it. Our first story is in from Thisday newspaper. It's a rather big bit of news here. Otedola is to divest from Forte oil and share prices rise to 6-month high. So it was announced that he is to sell his 75% direct and indirect shareholdings in the company, according to a notification to the Nigerian Stock Exchange. The questions are, why?
Yeah, really interesting. So before we get to the whys, right? The transaction is not complete. Is expected to close in the first quarter of next year. Forte oil shares got a bump on the news of Otedola's divestment. It's not done very well this year, which is saying a lot. It's underperformed the stock exchange, and the stock exchange has not exactly had a great year. But hey, I'm sure Ruth is dealt with that.
It's been volatile, yes.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and the company has also, prior to this, announced plans to restructure its business. Is divested out of its upstream services, also outside of power generation for the obvious reasons. Power generation being a poison chalice here in Nigeria, and also the downstream business in Ghana. So, to the interesting question, why?
Why?
The statement does say that Otedola is divesting out of the company in order to pursue, and this is a direct quote, explore and maximize business opportunities in refining and petrochemicals. The question then becomes, to the best of my knowledge, he does not have a refining company set up. There are very few of them that are currently on the ground, except a certain
his bestie.
Except a certain company which is building a refinery, like it has owned by, like you said, his bestie, Africa's richest. Africa's richest man. So there has been speculation that there might be a possible end time with that. I'm just thinking, for him to have divested 75% of his shareholding in what is, albeit, and if you look at the numbers, and you should check out the story on Thisday, Forte Oil has been making a tidy penny, right, over the last couple of years. The revenue generation profile of what is going down in Lekki must be something for him to say, okay, I want out of this because I think
I want into that. Yes, I want into something else. Very big news. We'll come back to that. I'm going to move on to this next story from Thisday newspaper. IDPs protest against incessant attacks by bandits on Zamfara. So Fred, I'm coming to you for this one. Now, following what they've described as incessant attacks on villages by bandits in Zamfara state, some internally displaced persons in the Asafe town local government on Monday went on a rampage. They actually set the council secretariat ablaze. They burned 19 vehicles. They're really, they've had it. It's really quite scary how this has gone. But what are your thoughts on this story?
Yeah, so as you said, they're protesting attacks on the road that leads to, there's a major road that leads to Zaria, Kaduna, Kanu, Sokoto, Kebbi. But the manner they've done it doesn't help. You can't go destroying property. You can't go destroying government properties. The interesting thing in the story is that afterwards it's said that there's heavy presence of security and police forces and all of that But if that was there in the first place, we wouldn't have all of this. So it's just unfortunate that it has to take this level of someone being fed up, for them to get the necessary kind of protection that they should have gotten in the first place. But it doesn't give them any authority, or it doesn't give them any permission to go destroying government assets. Or
most certainly not. But people could be quite worried because it feels that we've been in a state of things bubbling and getting ready to boil over on different fronts. And when we see a situation like this, and considering the number of displaced persons that we have in the country, that's quite worrying. Some of them have been away from their homes for years at a stretch. They keep saying, oh, it might be okay for you to go back, but nothing concrete can be done. The government hasn't really necessarily secured most of their hometowns, even though, again, the news seems to come out to say, oh, they're just about ready to be moved. But there are a lot of displaced persons. If we see this sort of, any concerns about seeing this sort of repeat performance in other IDP camps or areas?
Yeah, so that's a good point that you're stressing, is that it seems like the once there's like turmoil in any location, just identifying an IDP camp and taking them there is like the final solution. So there's no real thought into getting them back to their original, inhabiting spaces, right? And as you said, you would naturally be because being in an ID camp is almost like a temporary state, and if you're in this temporary state consistently, it starts becoming permanent. So there's other kind of easily agitations that will come out of you, so that's one of the things the government really have to take into place, is that this is not the permanent home of this. And then stating again, this is Zamfara. Zamfara is actually on the western part of Nigeria, and all this Boko Haram turmoil is on the eastern part.
In the northeastern.
Yeah, the
Okay.
northeastern. So it's the northwestern. So you can also imagine how trying to. So they're a bit taken away from their actual common area, or common understanding of what's their traditional locale or their traditional heritage or something.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for that. Let's go back to this story from the Punch newspaper on fuel scarcity. Speaking of being fed up, I think Nigerians are a bit tired of that. But the headline reads, the DPR moves to tackle diversion to neighbouring countries. So that's Department of Petroleum Resource, Kaduna Zonal Office, say that they've taken adequate measures to tackle fuel diversion to neighbouring countries like the republics of Chad, Niger, and Benin. The zonal operations controller, Isa Tafida, stated this in a press conference in Kaduna on Monday.
Yeah, so he says adequate measures have been taken to ensure there's no diversion of petroleum products. DPR will not tolerate any act of sabotage that will create artificial scarcity and hardship on motorists. Again, not clear on what measures were taken. This story is short on detail,
yes,
but very, very heavy on aspiration. It reads almost like a reproduced press release.
We do know actually that the NNPC have said that they've stocked up several thousand barrels just for this Yuletide season, just to get us through this.
So, but of course, but it's conflating two issues, right? First and foremost, even though we have experienced almost 100% increase in the price of petrol at the pump, right, over the last 6-7 years, you've got a situation where Nigeria is still one of the cheapest places in the world in dollar terms to buy fuel, right? It's one of the cheapest places in Africa to buy fuel. Of all of the countries in West Africa, we are one of the cheapest places, if not the cheapest place to buy fuel. So because that price differential exists, there is the incentive to take these things across the border. And my question, looking at this story, is, are borders now secure, right? Because it is well known and established facts. All you need to do is go to any of these border communities. You've got customs officials, you've got other officials from the different enforcement agencies who actively encourage this ring tripping and this illegal smuggling of petroleum products across the border. So the question now is, have there been wholesale changes in the enforcement superstructure, in the enforcement architecture, right, that will ensure that these things do not happen? It's not clear from this story. And if my hunch, and if the hunch of most of our listeners is to be believed, this is, again, like I said, a press release story.
Well, let's move on. Is this press release, though? It certainly is quite a bit of news from the New Telegraph. CBN and MTN resolved their $8.1 billion fund repatriation issue, and that's a very, very big issue to be resolving. So remember that the CBN had, in August of 2018, directed MTN Nigeria to reverse repatriations valued at about $8.1 billion done on its behalf by 4 commercial banks between 2007 and 2015 on the basis of certificates of capital importation irregularly issued to MTN. I mean, the long and short of this is that they hadn't been given their final approval, which is what they've sort of come to, and they've reached some sort of resolution. But I'm going to go to you for this, Fred. What are your thoughts on this story? Do you want to break it down for our listeners?
Yeah. So it also states in the article that the banks have actually already been penalized. So Shattered Bank 2.4 billion, Stanbic Bank 1.8 billion, Citibank and Diamond Bank. So I'm wondering what's going to happen with that. So it said the funds are going to be returned or from the central bank, but it was the article stated.
Yes, it has been. They debited their account. It was they removed the money.
So are they going to put it back? You know. So the
yes, the CBN, as far as I understand what the article is saying, has taken that money since the regulator debited the account Standard Chartered, so they collected what was owed them to a certain extent from the banks.
From the banks,
yes.
But they hadn't gotten it from MTN.
No,
exactly.
That's what they're now.
So now
for, yes.
Yeah, and they're saying that with review of additional documents, MTN is no longer required to reverse the historical. So they're not. So they've seen more documents, right? That's made it clear that they feel like MTN wasn't in the wrong as originally understood. So with that being said, obviously, that's what I'm asking. So are they going to now?
Well, no, they didn't say they weren't in the wrong. No, they said that they understood. They said, okay, however, the CBN identified that the proceeds from the preference shares in MTN's private placement remittances of 2008 were irregular, having been based on CCIs that were issued without the final approval. So they hadn't received final approval at the end of the day. So CBN and MTN have now mutually agreed that the aforementioned transaction will be reversed notionally to bring it into full compliance with foreign exchange laws and regulations. But I think it still comes at a cost, because Roots and I spoke about this earlier this morning. I think some of those details are missing from this, but there was still a cost attached to that.
Yeah, some of those details are missed. So essentially what the MTN is saying is, with respect to a specific set of CCIs, right? Those transactions did not fully comply with foreign exchange regulations, and so that notional reversal is for the value for those specific CCIs. That's why the amount is significantly reduced from the initial amounts that they were claiming, and that was because MTN, furnished documents to show that for the vast majority of these transactions, everything was okay.
It was copacetic. Is that how we say it? Okay, excellent.
So MTN staff can now breathe.
Yes, but it's still money they're paying. It's a lot of money. Let's carry on. We've got messages coming through, so let me take a few of these messages. MI from Akoka says, I hope this won't stop me from singing Otedola with the money. All fingers pointing to the refinery coming through in 2019, talking about the divestment of funds, or shares rather. The MI continues saying he must have smelled blood in Lekki, because divesting 75% stake in a company like Forte isn't bubble gum. Merry Christmas, everybody. Yeah. Benga Kamu, meanwhile, sent us a WhatsApp message to say, it is heartrending what's happening in Zamfara state. People are being killed daily, and the elite keep looking the other way. How can the state tolerate the level of banditry in Zamfara? Really worrying stuff, really worrying. While Big T comes in to say the same thing, government, please do something about security. There are just too many killings and deaths. The police in Zamfara and elsewhere with elections next year. It's a very, very grave worry, great concerns there. Thank you very much, guys, for your messages as we continue. Up next from Thisday newspaper, EFCC applies for interim forfeiture of $2.8 million intercepted at Enugu airport. So we're finding money again in special places, but Ikemesit, I'm going to you for your comments on this story.
So the EFCC has essentially applied to the Federal High Court for a temporary forfeiture of the $2.8 million that it intercepted at Enugu's airport last week. The agency said it will also be seeking an order to keep the 2 workers of Banker's Warehouse that it found trying to move the money in extended custody, adding that they were already providing the necessary information. The EFCC's acting spokesperson also said that no official from either Union Bank, which the company, in this case Banker's Warehouse, said he was moving those monies on behalf of was claiming ownership. But so then again, you should probably go check out the story. But I have a couple of challenges with the story. First,
Okay.
there's a patent lack of context. There's no comment from Union Bank. There's no comment from Bankers Warehouse. We do know. I have seen a statement. I have seen a letter from the bank, purportedly from Bankers Warehouse Limited, I should say, to the CBN, actually calling this out and saying that this is a pattern of harassment that the company has suffered at the hands of the EFCC. There's no context to this story as it were, so it would have been nice to have an interesting balance of both sides of the story. It's worth noting that our economy is not fully cashless at the moment, and in order for a lot of these reconciliations to happen, within bank branches and also within banks, physical money has to be moved, as it were. So this is just like context to our listeners, just for them to understand that this is not totally unheard of for you to have transaction sums either in naira or in foreign exchange that are this large, moving in between airports and other transit points around the country.
This is $2.8 million though.
It is 2.8 million.
I mean, let's because that's a lot of money. I know, because we're used to seeing billions and millions in the pages of newspapers, but this is also millions in forex and cash.
Indeed it is. But then again, this company has come out and said, this is what we do. We move, monies and funds of this nature on behalf of banks and other companies, and these things are cleared out. We had that documentation. We had explained to these guys what I would have expected that the EFCC would do. It's just work the back channels to walk through the legal process to actually determine that this was a legitimate money transfer. But it seems like the EFCC's patented MO, they are doing this more in the press.
It's
than
really
out
quite
there.
sad, and that's the worrying part of things.
It almost feels like they are going on a braggadocious victory lap. Oh, we found this amount of money. It's forex.
But if they're curious and that's what they do, that's what they do. Thank you very much for that, Ikemesit.
Sure.
Let's go over to talk about NAFDAC from the Vanguard newspaper. Return of NAFDAC to ports and borders pays off, says ADEYEYE. So the return of the National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control to the nation's ports and borders in May of this year, after 7 years of absence, and heightened readiness and alertness of the agency's Ports Inspection Directorate have significantly enhanced activities involving the control of importation of drugs, food, chemicals, detergents, cosmetics, so on and so forth. At least this is what Mojisola ADEYEYE is stating at the moment. Over to you, Fred.
Yeah, so my thing is, why were they even absent for the last 7 years? When NAFDAC was created, one of the great wins for them was being able to intercept the poor medicine or poisons that were being brought into the country, and how they were saving lives, to have been absent. And the port is one of the easy, or one of the direct avenues in which these things come into the country. So to be absent from there in the first place, I don't even understand that. But since they've been there, obviously they've been like great interceptions. They've been so they've had almost like 92 containers, stated in the article, that have been intercepted of either pharmaceutical products or unregistered pharmaceutical products in different locations: Lagos, River State, and One. And then it states that this has yielded a lot of, like, obviously good progress since they've been back. I just commend NAFDAC, because since its formation, it seems like it's one of those agencies that have really done good for the welfare of Nigerians as a whole. If it's getting people to be to go through the process of having legalized or standardized medical supplies, or obviously there are areas where people have difficulties in trying to register with NAFDAC, the legal products.
We've got to look at that.
Yeah, but in all, like, the NAFDAC creation has been like a good thing for the country.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Ikemesit, let's sort of stay talking about health a little bit here. The NHIS crisis, though, the federal government defends the delay in the panel report submission. That's the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, on Monday defended the lateness in the submission of the report of the independent fact-finding panel that was set up by President Muhammad Buhari to investigate the allegations of fraud against the Executive Secretary of the National Health Insurance Scheme, Professor Usman Yusuf. Now, if our listeners can cast their minds back, you remember there was a lot of drama around Mr. Yusuf. Should he leave the office? Should he not? At one point, forcefully making his way back in with armed personnel. But what are your thoughts on this latest development and with what Boss Mustafa has to say?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So essentially, what Boss Mustafa is saying is, so when when this investigative panel was inaugurated in November, they were given 2 weeks to complete their assignment. The committee's report eventually showed up more than 7 weeks after it was set up. And what essentially Boss was saying is that the panel needed to thoroughly complete its assignment. This was something that the federal government was worried about, and he said that if we would cast our minds back to earlier this year, the president essentially went on an appointment spree, as it were, and he said, that might have unsettled the system somewhat, and so in order to bring new board members and their chief executives up to speed on the current policies and programs of government, as well as legislations guiding them on how to conduct the business of their respective agencies, induction courses, which over 60 agencies in 4 badges have attended, had to be organized, as it were. And it says something again, and this is something that we've talked about repeatedly on the show, about the relative weakness, not relative, the absolute weakness of institutions here in Nigeria. So you have a situation where this guy is facing fraud allegations. In most other crimes, you either resign or you step back, or you tell yourself that you give yourself a bit of absence, while those allegations are investigated. But essentially, the NHIS executive secretary just bluffed his way through, and for good reason. There's established precedent, especially under the lives of this administration, that you can keep living the way you've been living, no matter what fraud or evil, official evil, has been stamped to your name.
That's quite sad.
Yeah,
that is quite sad indeed.
It is really sad. It's also worth noting, it is not clear if he has continued in his official capacity while this investigative panel has been going on again. Talking about the depth of reporting and journalism, that story, that context doesn't shine through from the story. It would be nice to know that. But then again, 2 months removed from the elections, it's also not clear what the government is going to do with this. Are they going to throw him out? Are they going to, it's one thing to investigate, it's another thing to get the reports out, and it's then a whole kettle of fish to actually do something about it. And I think that's when Nigerians want to see more action.
Thank you very, very much for that, Ikemesit. I'll take a few messages and then we'll round up with a Christmas message from the president. Big T sends in this message to say the price differential of Nigerian fuel. Samsung is cheaper in Korea. iPhone is cheaper in the USA. Items in source areas are usually cheaper, so our oil should be cheaper for us. We have the thing in abundance, but our problem is corruption and border control, he says. All right. While Chris says, oh, Merry Christmas. But it just looks like EFCC have joined politicians by distracting us with noisy headlines while they douse flames in other places. But, what do I know? If only they would invest more resources in prosecuting proper financial crimes and come out on top winning. If only. While Felix Ayanwu from Lagos says, for your information, NAFDAC have never been absent from the ports. I do business at the air and seaports. NAFDAC have always been there. I don't understand where that story is coming from. Well, Felix, they were supposed to have officially left those areas, because remember there was heavy criticism of the number of different agents that you would find in a number of different port areas. So they weren't meant to be there. But thank you for setting that. It's always useful to know what actually obtains on the ground versus what the papers are reporting. While Olori Africa is just saying, no real comments today, just saying Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Olori.
So let's go over to the president, all right, from the Daily Times. He was wishing us a Merry Christmas, and he reaffirmed his avowed commitment to free, fair, credible, and violence-free polls in 2019. That was part of his Christmas message on Monday to Nigerians, and he admonished everyone across ethnic and religious and political divides to set aside their differences and work for the good of the country, also assuring that his promise to conduct a credible election is not a ruse or yet another vain political promise. He says, my word is my bond. All right, powerful stuff there. Are you feeling moved by the president's Christmas message, Fred?
Okay.
So
free and fair,
contained enthusiasm.
Yes,
it's just leaking out of you.
Free and fair elections is actually the standard that the current government met So we just want them to maintain that. It's the least that we can have as the people of the country, is to be able to express our rights, to be able to pick who we want to lead us for the next 4 years. There's just one thing that was said that I wasn't really pleased with. It said, let's tell the world indeed that something good can come from Nigeria. Great things are coming out of Nigeria. It just seems like the context always looks like we're not, in other parts apart from politics, doing great things out of Nigeria.
Yeah, and again, this is coming from a president that's routinely bashes Nigeria once overseas.
I'm just bashing. I think he's not great with rhetoric.
But going further, he speaks about unity. He speaks about us, embracing and I love that, embracing our diversity and still sticking together and trying to make
someone
the country
wrote that speech. 1, 2.
Why are you angry?
Did you guys see?
Why can't you just
Folu,
say
I'm in a
that's
festive mood.
No.
Lagos, have you noticed Folu and I have not sparred this morning?
I know, we're doing our
that
best.
festive,
Hey,
right? But
yes.
did you see? I don't know. Did you guys see the video on social media of him, of the president, the vice president, and the APC national chairman, Adam Soshomole?
No.
Singing. The video of that singing Christmas song.
Bless. It's horrid, I'm sure.
That spoke to me more than all of these prepared remarks.
But I appreciate the efforts of the singing.
Let's just say I don't want to be with the 3 of them in the karaoke bar. That's all I'm going to say.
Very interesting. Thank you very much.
My voice is horrible.
Okay, let's not test it out this morning. Let's not.
Are you sure? I thought we were going to end with a Christmas.
Well, you can try. Which is your favorite carol? Let's see. What shall we do? Hark the Herald Angels sing.
You people really want to out me on Lagos Radio this morning.
It.
I'm not doing
this. We've got a couple of
this.
minutes. Come on, hark the Herald Angels sing. Glory to the
newborn King.
I'm literally twisting my lips doing that.
I think we're now done with Fresh Request for this morning. I will not torture the rest of Lagos with that sound. But thank you very much, gentlemen. I really appreciate your coming in.
Pleasure.
Merry Christmas to you both once more. Merry Christmas to everybody that's out there listening. We truly appreciate you. And it's really nice. All the EC Cruz appreciates it. It says, yippee, you not try. See? Small Christmas cheer.
Wash us, Cruz. Wash us.
Excellent stuff. Do stick around though, because coming up next, we will be talking entertainment inside of the Grapevine here on Smooth Breakfast. Keep it locked.
More money for you. Download the iInvest app at www.iinvestng.com.